He just took my bag of clothes from the trip, put it in the car, and then took the backpack my son threw in the car. He accelerated with the car and sent us on our way. I entered and he transformed into a lot of things. There, I met the real monster with whom I was living. He simply put me in a hotel and left. Although it was just me, I had my home. I said. But I thought he was going to be with me to try to solve things. I don't know. He just took my bag of clothes from the trip and put it in the car. He also took my son's backpack and threw it in the car. He drove really fast, and I felt like I was entering a different world. I met the real monster with whom I was living. He put me in a hotel and left. I thought he was going to be with me to try to solve things, but I was wrong. I was even vulnerable and I didn't know what to do. Music. So I was about 18 or 19 years old when I met my son's father. He was older and I was in a relationship with him. I got tired of this relationship and I spent time with my sister during that time. She was my sister's neighbor, and I got to know myself with him. I lived with him for a while. I was so scared to be vulnerable because I felt like I didn't live up to my potential. I was only 18 or 19 when I met my son's father. I was in a relationship, but I got tired of it and started spending time with my sister's neighbor. It was a really good time. I got to know myself. We didn't get married, but we lived together for a while. Then when I was 22, I found out I was pregnant. I was 17 or 18 at the time. I was living with Elle and got pregnant. I always dated people who weren't right for me. We stayed together for a while, but I wanted to live other things. I thought he was the love of my life, but he wasn't. I didn't get married, but I lived with him for a long time until I found out I was pregnant with my 22-year-old son. I was 17 and 18 years old at the time. I was with Elle and found out I was pregnant. I always entered into relationships with people who weren't right for me, and we stayed together for a while. He wanted to live other things and believed he was the love of my life, but he wasn't. I kind of lost myself in the process. I left what life took me. I stopped to pay attention to the responsibilities I should have as a mother, not to my son. I took care of him and treated him well, but I didn't take care of my own emotional side. I thought I didn't live to the fullest until I was 17, 18, and 19 years old. I had a bit of a rough patch after that and I kind of closed myself off a bit. I was so focused on taking care of my son, and I didn't really pay much attention to my own needs. I was always there for my son, but I didn't really take care of myself. I thought that I didn't live to the fullest until I was 22. I kind of closed myself off and stayed in that relationship for a few years, but it didn't work out. After that, I left and lived in my father-in-law's house. I left and went to live with my son. I worked and lived with my son at that time. I worked in an area of Sao Paulo and lived in another area of Sao Paulo, far away from my son. I took care of my son alone. I didn't have his support because he believed that. I stayed with my father-in-law for a few years, but it didn't work out. I left and went to live with my son. I worked and lived with my son at the time. I worked in an area of Sao Paulo and lived in another area of Sao Paulo, away from my son. I took care of my son alone. I didn't have his support because he believed that he had to live. I supported him in every sense and opened my hands from rights that were from my son's father as a gift of financial support. I kind of put that responsibility on myself. Time has passed and 10 years later I got involved with a person. I believed that I could be the person I knew from my life. I believed it because I knew him from childhood, adolescence, and school. I got involved with her only because he wanted and I was there for him every step of the way, and I never stopped hoping we could be more than friends. I was ready to give this relationship my all, but he wanted exclusivity. I didn't get home, and I had to be there for my eldest son. I couldn't give up on my son. I ended up having a disagreement with him and he said, "You can either come and stay with me, or you won't see your son anymore." I explained to him that I had a son and couldn't give him up. I really wanted to be just like him. I didn't get home and I felt responsible for my eldest son. He believed that I had to live with him in situations of his, and I couldn't give up on my son. I ended up having one disagreement with him and he said, "You come and stay with me at home, or people won't see you anymore." I explained to him that I had a son I couldn't get out of the situation. He didn't understand. He said, If you are not like that, I don't want a relationship. This was a while ago. I gave up on this part of my life again, and only 2 or 3 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I never found this man to this day. I never found this one again. He had a brief contact with him, but he left the situation when I introduced his son for a photo. He didn't understand and I said, "If you're not like that, I don't want a relationship." This was a while ago and I gave up on this part of my life. Then 2 to 3 months later I found out I was pregnant. I never found this man and I never found another man again. He was in contact with me briefly, but he left the situation when I introduced his son for a photo because I didn't have contact with him. He accepted that he was his son, but he never had a concern about being close to him. Today my son is 16. In December he turned 17 and he never. There was this side of the father too and I half liked him. I had childhood problems with my father, so I was responsible for not giving my son a father's figure. I looked for it incessantly. I knew my father was already sick when I recorded it. I didn't have much contact with my father, but I always felt he was there for me. He knew he was my father, but he never seemed concerned about being close. Now my son is 16 and in December he'll be 17. He never really had a chance to know his father. I had my own childhood struggles with my dad, so I tried to be a father figure for my son. I knew my dad was already sick when I was born. My parents moved from Praia Grande to São Caetano do Sul, and I went with them. Once we were there, I did my part. I worked to support my family. When my dad found out he was sick, the disease had already progressed for 5 years. We just found out that he was going to die. He went with the doctor, but the doctor never found out what was wrong. I was already feeling sick there. My parents moved from Praia Grande to São Caetano do Sul, and I went with them. Once we were there, I did my part. I worked only to support my father, who had been living with this disease for 5 years. We just found out that a close friend of his had died. He was with the doctor, but the doctor never found out what was wrong with him. He was more focused on his heart, but not on the other parts of his body. He had cancer and I made the decision to go to the hospital. My mother was already elderly, and I needed her to be strong for me. She accompanied me, but she also had to stay in the hospital. I even had a brother who accompanied me, who lived in São Caetano do Sul. I'm going to share more about my heart, but first I want to acknowledge the impact of my brother's cancer diagnosis on my family. When I was in the hospital with him, my mother was already quite elderly, and I felt compelled to be there for her as well. I had a brother who lived in São Caetano, and who was a constant source of support during that time. However, his wife found it difficult to cope with the situation. I had to find a way to balance my own needs with my professional commitments to support my parents, who were both dealing with their own health challenges. My son, who was 3 at the time, was also a huge source of support. He was there for me and I was there for him. I was there for my father and mother, and I was there for my son. When my younger son was 3, my brother had already moved from the city. He asked us to go with him and I did. I was there for my father, who was suffering from the disease. He was already elderly, and I ended up staying with him in the same hospital where he lived. He was practically hospitalized with cancer and I was there. I had 2 children, a teenage son, and my brother had been living in the city for 4 years when he asked us to visit. I went with him, and my father's picture came with me. He was already quite elderly, and I ended up staying with him in this part of the hospital where he lived. He was practically hospitalized with cancer and I was there with him. I had 2 children, a teenage son of 16 and a son of 4. My father is sick, and my mother can't take care of him. I had to have a family structure so that someone could take care of my children while I did this part. There was no way to divide into 2, and my mother didn't hear my concerns about my father's situation. My mother took care of him as much as she could. My sister-in-law and I are taking care of my 14-year-old son and my father, who is 4 years old. I'm also responsible for my children. I'm doing my best to take care of my family and my father. I'm worried about my father's situation, but my mother is doing her best to take care of him. My mother and I are staying with my children. Everything was normal for one day, But then my brother came to visit and said that my mother needed to go to the hospital for home rest. I agreed and I said that I would take care of everything. However, 2 days before I went to visit my father, my mother fell and was exhausted. My father fell in the hospital and had a deep cut. My mother had a really tough time with it, and she ended up in the hospital. I was there when my brother told me that my mother had gone into the hospital. He said that she needed to go there to rest, so I agreed. I thought it would only be for 2 days, but 2 days turned into months. My father fell and got a deep cut on his head and shoulder, and he had to go to the hospital. They said they would keep her there, but I really didn't think that was right. I talked to my sister-in-law and my brother and I said, someone should stay with my children. I have to take care of them. I took care of my children and I was there for months. I was taking care of my mother at the hospital, and I had a lot of support from my family. My mother was very nervous, but I was taking care of her. I was so worried about her that I didn't even think about my own health. I lost my nephew and my mother when I told my mother that he had died. She had Alzheimer's, as the doctor said. I'm so grateful for the support of my family during this time. My nervous mother was with me and I was so worried. I took care of him with all my heart, even when I was at my wit's end. I lost my nephew and my mother when I told her that he had passed away. She had Alzheimer's, as the doctor said. She didn't leave the house anymore, so I realized that she was not going to come back. I took responsibility for her, and I took care of her for 8 years. During that time I found out that I wasn't well. I followed my music and I started to feel a hernia. I believe it was due to the weight. My father put me in the bath because this part, even in the I realized that I couldn't take care of her anymore. I was so sad, but I kept going. I had to work and take care of my children. I had to take care of her with Alzheimer's, so I had to work out again. I was so tired, but I kept going. I found out that I wasn't well, but I followed my life. I started to feel a hernia coming out, and I believe it was due to my weight. My father put me in the bath, and this was in the hospital. I didn't allow anyone to come near him. I don't know why, but I discovered a hernia. I didn't go after it. Then my father passed away. I was very tired and I felt exhausted. I asked my brothers to stay with my mother. She had already been with me for 8 years, so I asked my brothers to stay. I was the one who took care of my mother, but I didn't have much support. It was really hard for me, and I was also dealing with a hernia. Then my father passed away and I was completely exhausted. I was so tired and I asked my brothers to stay with me. My mother had already been with me for 8 years, and I asked my brothers to help me with this task because it was so difficult. Alzheimer's is not easy, especially with a child. I put a little bit of responsibility on my eldest son for helping, but he didn't charge me for taking care of her. I didn't want to take care of her, but I had to work and take care of my children. I had to take care of her with Alzheimer's, so I had to work out again. My mother and I shared this task, but she was really the one who carried the weight. It's a lot to handle, especially with a child so young. I tried to get my eldest son to help out, but he didn't want to. I couldn't ask my mother to take care of her because I had to work and take care of my kids. I had to take care of her with Alzheimer's, so I had to work out again. We lived in 4 places with just my mother and 2 children. I know that a lot of people accuse caregivers of things that aren't true. It's not okay. I was the one who took care of her, but no one helped with the care. I gave up my children because I couldn't handle it. It was really hard on me emotionally, physically, and in every way. I lived in 4 homes with 2 children and my mother. I always accepted everything, even when it was really hard. I know it's not uncommon for caregivers to be accused of things they didn't do. It's not fair. I was the one taking care of everything, but no one helped out. I gave up my children. I didn't have the emotional or physical strength to support them. One day I lost it. I spoke to my brothers saying, "Divide my mother's tasks with me, or I will go to court and ask the law to intervene." I don't remember if it was alienation or parental, but I believe it is. I contacted some people at the public defender's office and asked for their help. They came, but they didn't. One day I lost it. I spoke to my brothers saying, "If you don't divide my mother's tasks with me, I'll go to court and ask for legal support." I don't remember if it was alienation or parental, but I believe it was this. I contacted some people at the public defender's office and asked for their help. They came, but they didn't resolve things amicably. They said, "We'll talk about it as a family." Well, then we'll be in this part. Now you'll take it again when you have better. It was not so. I was assaulted by my brothers. They coerced me within my house. Now we command everything. I'm responsible for mine, and you won't see the mother anymore. It's as if it were a punishment for me to ask them to divide this task. At the time, I ended up accepting everything. This is what I always accepted. I was always being encouraged by my parents to want a family, and I always ended up accepting this part of my brothers. They took my mother and I followed. I got a job, I went to work, and I put my younger son in school. He went to school, and a neighbor took care of him while I worked. My eldest had already gone. He went to live with his grandfather because he had arranged a job, and I was going to. When I started college, I was going through a lot of personal stuff with my mom. I didn't really pay much attention to my dad's journey because he was on his own path. I didn't even realize he was there until I saw him. I supported him because it was the beginning of his journey into adulthood. My mom wasn't his mother, and I was there for him. He was on his own, and I started to feel tired physically, but this was really hard. I was in a lot of pain, and it was really hard for me to deal with that situation. I started taking medication for it, and I continued taking it for a long time. I felt really alone because I didn't have many friends. I thought about all my friends in my head, but I was more closed off. I felt like I was on my own without a friend or someone to talk to. I ended up using Tinder and meeting some great people. That was a pretty amazing conversation. I remember the day I downloaded the Tinder app. My son was with me and he gave me some great advice. He said, "Mom, you don't find someone you need. You don't find someone who's a company. You are very alone for many years. You need to have someone." I went in, and a week later, I believe a week or 2 weeks after having downloaded the app, I met this person who was my husband. To me, he was the prince that I had been waiting for my whole life. Everything knows and always, he was a really special person. He was a lot older than me and my son, and he lived in a small house. We were very different, but that didn't matter. We just enjoyed spending time together. We'd talk on the phone for hours, even on days when we didn't sleep. We'd talk on the phone in the morning, and then we'd have lunch or dinner together. I always said, not because my reality was so much better. Today I can see that things were different for him. At the time it was very different. He insisted a lot. I managed to convince him to meet me about 4 months later because I was afraid. I was with a child and in a relationship I didn't know. I didn't know who I was going to put in my life. I ended up sorting that out and retreating. Fuel was showing me that it was not. He wasn't a monster, and I found it a bit hard to meet people at first. I was scared, but after about 4 or 5 months I let myself open up. When I met him, it was like we were meant for each other. I finally found someone who made me feel alive. In my mind, I had this picture of what my perfect man would be like, and he fit the bill. He was a kind, charming guy. We got to know each other better, and over time I realized that it wasn't that at all. He was the kind of person who sent flowers and was involved in his life in every way. It was all very fast, too. I needed to live this to get a little of what I lived. I needed to forget a little of what I lived. I needed to get out. I needed it at that moment. I needed to live, and it was like this kind of soap opera. It was very surreal in my life. He was such a kind and generous person. He was so patient with me, and he even took me to live with him because it made things easier. At the time I was living in Ipiranga, a neighborhood in Sao Paulo, and he lived in Itapiraca da Serra, which was quite far away. But we were able to see each other quite often. As I was leaving, I kind of ran away from my job and I went through a lot. I'm not sure if it was an escape, but he was living with me and my son for less than 3 months. My son never really had that paternal figure, so he kind of joined in. I ended up taking my son to this place and I accepted that. I think the process of us being together is over. We met 2 years ago, and I don't regret making a mistake in the process of knowing if I still know those crises of pain. She came back and then she disappeared. I came back and I masked with the medication EA. I masked because he never demonstrated how to do it. He demonstrated and he gave signs that he was an abuser, a monster, but I was so dependent on him that I thought it was cute to see his jealousy and the way he treated me. I couldn't take a bath alone because I had to wait for him. I could have dinner because I had to wait for him to finish dinner, you know? When we got to work, he sat down in front of the TV. And I had to wait until he got up to take a bath. I couldn't move, I couldn't eat, I couldn't mess with his clothes. I was thinking to myself, what a woman usually makes in the head of a man. I didn't have to do that. It was in his head. He knew how to treat me the way I should or shouldn't do. I had no life. I accepted the crumbs, which was hard for me. I spoke, but I'm used to washing to pass my time. This is how I was created. As soon as I like to take care of my things, and he doesn't allow me to make him. Kind of put it in a naked but at the same time mistreated. When I went to live in the city, I had a little house where I left my things. I kept paying the rent because gradually we started spending time together and it was nice. I would visit him first, and then I would gradually spend more and more time with him. When we had a fight, I would stay at his house. There was one thing I couldn't accept, but it was so close that it was hard to let go. Sometimes we had a silly fight and he wanted me to stay. I said I had to go because I had to take care of things at home and solve my problems. He had already transformed one monster because he arrived at dawn in my house, said that I had a lover, which was a very complicated situation. Well, complicated is an understatement. He arranged situations that weren't even real, and I was giving all that to him. In my mind, that was healthy. It was. And that was how he traveled a lot. He traveled every weekend and spoke for me to make the plans, reserve the hotel, and choose the place. I chose the place, but I didn't like it much. Travel is not really my thing, but he asked if we could travel for the finals during the weekend. Some weekends I was under the weather, but I didn't know about the cancer. He was nervous about that. He asked his friend if I could do it because I didn't have health insurance. If he had to call SUS, he would ask him to go out of Brazil. I'm so grateful for this passage, but I had to pay a health plan. I had to leave everything behind to focus on my health. I stopped working and moved away from the city to get the care I needed. I was always feeling sick. He was exhausted from all of this. Then a friend of his asked if I could get some tests. He's well known in the city of Itapir. I had some tests done on Itapevi, and it turns out I had cancer. I had some symptoms like abdominal pain and it was really intense. I even fainted a few times. I thought it was from ERN and I started getting an investigation. I was at the doctor's office, and they asked me to get some exams for surgery because I was having constant pain. I had a little bit of blood in my stool, which is sometimes a sign of cervical cancer. I found out that I had some tests and the doctor asked me to get a colonoscopy. I did the colonoscopy, and the results of the biopsy came back in 15 days. I was diagnosed with cancer. It was a difficult time, but I'm grateful that I had the support of my loved ones. I think there was a point to our relationship. I felt judged because I was in pain and I put on my cancer-related guilt. He didn't realize he needed to take care of me because he didn't know how to take care of himself. He was only going to take care of someone sporadically, and today he was a love of her for only 5 minutes. He was already a monster. He spoke for people who he was. He was sad to see my situation. He really loved me, but he treated me so poorly that I couldn't stand him. I had to get surgery, which is always scary. But after that, he left me in the hospital all alone. I didn't have any family there to support me, and I didn't have a family doctor either. So I had to figure it out on my own. I had to leave my son again to take care of me. I couldn't be with him and he really needed me. I was loved, but the reality was different. This was how he treated me, so I was very hurt. I had the surgery and I should have been supported. He abandoned me in the hospital. I didn't have a family support network, as you already know. He didn't have a family AP, so I had to follow alone. I had to once again abandon my son, this time to take care of me. Abandon in the sense of not being with him on the day he needed, like he deserved it, and I went to do this surgery. I was hospitalized for about 15 to 25 days. It was all so surreal. God changed, God supported me. I think from a form he showed me in a well different that I needed to know myself. I needed to understand what was happening around me. You know. And they asked me to go to the hospital. I was hospitalized, but it was so subtle. All this part of the hospital because I didn't realize that I went. I truly believe that he was ready for this change. I underwent surgery, followed by a brief stay in the hospital. During that time, I had a couple of encounters with him and he seemed to be doing well. I don't remember much about the surgery itself, except for the moments right before it. I heard people saying, "Let's go. And Andre, the surgery will be done now." I'm not sure if it was divine intervention that made me feel so calm, but it worked. I went to the operating room, and the surgery lasted for about 12 minutes and 30 seconds. When I left, we went out for a little walk. I was in the operating room for 12 minutes and 30 seconds. When I left, we went out for a walk. Postoperative care. I went to the ICU where there was a complication. I spent a few days there, but everything turned out well. Then, the hospital contacted him to let you know that he had come to visit. I was hospitalized for 25 to 28 days. I think he came twice to the hospital. I was in the operating room and then the post-op ICU. There was a complication, but I recovered. I spent a few days in the ICU, and then the hospital contacted me to let you know that he had climbed the room. I was hospitalized for 25 to 28 days. I think he appeared twice in the hospital during that time. It was serious surgery, not a joke. During that time, I didn't see my son. I didn't know what was happening. I was in the hospital, and a daughter of a patient took care of me. It was a public hospital, so there were 2 people in the room. She helped me take care of myself and bathed me. She did this process. Did you understand? He hardly came. He claimed that he worked. The surgery was serious, but it wasn't a joke. I didn't see my son for 25 to 28 days, and I didn't know what was happening. I was in the hospital, and the daughter of another patient was taking care of me. It was a public hospital, so there were 2 people in the room. She helped me take care of myself and bathed me. She did everything, and he hardly came. He claimed that he worked, but he didn't have time to visit. The hospital released the visiting time, and sometimes they didn't. The patient who took care of me was also there for an operation. I went to PR for surgery. My son talked to him. XBK, you will have to stay with him. This part is not quiet. I'll take care of him. I believed that. He didn't have much time to visit, and sometimes he wasn't allowed to. The hospital visits were released, and sometimes it was hard. The patient who took care of me was also there for surgery. I went to PR for surgery and was hospitalized. My son talked to him and he said, "You'll have to stay with him." I'm okay with that. He was my husband, and he treated my son differently in my presence and absence. He was aggressive and dry, not beating around the bush. I can't say that I agree with all of that, but he was very direct with his words. He always treated my son very well. He was always our amazing age. He made a birthday cake and did things. It's okay if he wasn't there for my son. I just wish he treated my son better. He was kind of aggressive, but not in an abusive way. He was always good to my son. He even made a birthday cake and did things for him. When he found out he was going to travel and had to take my son, it was a bit of a burden. I had my son in the hospital, and he ended up taking care of him. The girl who came to do some things at home and his daughter-in-law both helped out. They were there to support me while I was away. I'm so grateful for the support I received during this time. When I found out I was going to travel, I was worried about how it would affect my son. I had to take him to the hospital and I couldn't be there for him. I was worried that he would be upset, but he was so resilient. He didn't show any signs of distress, even though it was a difficult time for me. I asked him if he could contact me if he needed support, and he said he would. I wanted to see my son, and I'm so thankful for the help I received. I wasn't going to a party or a meeting of friends and travelers. I was going to the hospital for surgery to treat cancer. This didn't affect him at all. The news didn't shake him, and he didn't act differently. He did show me some things, but not in the way I expected. So, I asked how I could contact him if I wanted to see my son. The hospital denied it because they couldn't. Even he was smaller and couldn't. I had to wait all this time to be able to see my son. He knew what was happening. I didn't have contact with my son, and I had my older son. I asked him to call my son and ask him to see me. He was older and claimed that my son was in college with tests and couldn't come. My son really didn't come. The hospital wouldn't let me see him, even though he was smaller and I was the one who had been sick. I had to wait a long time just to see my son. He knew what was going on, but I couldn't contact him. I asked my son to call him, but he didn't. He was older and said my son was busy with college and tests, so he couldn't come see me, but he didn't come to see me during the hospital process or at home. He didn't come to see me. I ended up going back to my little house, the one I had left behind, because he was already gone and dropped me off. He just went to Natal with the friends and left me at home. He spoke to my neighbor and asked her to see what he could do to help. I told him later, but I get it. You were right, although you were returning from travel. I started the chemotherapy right away. I would love to see you during the hospital process. He didn't come to see me during that time, but he came back to my little house, the one he had left behind, because he was already gone. He left me at home with my neighbor and went to Natal with his friends. He told my neighbor, "Look, see what she needs. Then you can solve it later. I get it right with you, although returning from travel." I started the chemotherapy right away. He didn't have to take me in for chemotherapy. I lived in Pirituba, and my chemo was at the Cancer Institute in Osasco. It was at SESP Osasco, which was far away, but for him it was a problem because the 4 lasted 11 months, almost a year, and that was a burden for him. He doesn't understand that chemo is a process of DEP. Post-chemo, you're physically tired. It was really tough on him, having to take me to chemo in Piresica while my treatments were in Osasco at the Cancer Institute. It was a long way to travel, and it was hard on him. The treatments lasted for 11 months, almost a year, and that was really tough on him. He didn't understand that chemo is a process that takes a physical toll on you. You're not just hungry, you're exhausted. You don't want to see people because you're in so much pain. It's really hard to deal with nausea. I didn't have the right support to rest after chemo. I didn't have the right support to travel and speak. I had to go, and I had to go because I believed that if I didn't, I would lose this man. I'm not hungry, just feeling a bit sleepy. I don't really feel like seeing people. I'm having some body aches and feeling a bit nauseous. The process is a bit complicated, but I'm trying my best. I didn't have the right to rest after the chemo. Les would travel and speak, so let's go. I had to go with him because I believed that I would lose him if I didn't. I didn't think about it at all. I couldn't go to those places because of the horrible pains. Those who make chemicals can't sunbathe. He looked like he was purposefully carrying me there, and I had to cook for a crowd. It was a very hard part. Well, that's not all. It was destroying me inside because I wasn't seen with. I had my own life and I didn't want to get involved. I was in pain and it was hard to be around him. He was kind of a jerk. One day we were traveling and he just said, "Operate a chimio still." He turned to me and said, "You get your things and we'll go." When we returned from trips, he said, "I'll take a bath while you solve things here in the car and rest a little." I got in the car and he went up. I remember taking a bath and leaving Boli's. He was just that kind of guy. One day we were traveling and he simply disappeared. We were on the road and he turned to me and said, "You get your things and we'll return from our trip." He went up to take a bath while I sorted things out in the car and rested a little. I got up and lay down. He came back up and said, "I'm leaving, but I love you." I felt more obligated to welcome him than myself. I got up and said, "No, not now. I'm watching TV." I remember lying on the couch and he was watching TV. He got up and put me in a sitting position and said, "Take your things and I'll take you." I had a hard time believing it, but I thought, why not? I looked at his face and he looked at me. He was someone else. He was not the man I had met 5 years ago. He had just returned from a trip that day. He took my suitcase and my son's backpack, and he put them in the car. I thought it was just a joke, but I didn't know why. I looked at his face and he was someone else. It wasn't the man I'd known for almost 5 years. He simply took my suitcase and my son's backpack, put them in the car and drove away. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. He became a monster. I met the real monster with whom I was living. He simply put me in a hotel and left. I thought he was going to be with me to try to solve things, but I don't know what happened. I was so vulnerable that I didn't even know what to do. I was in a car accident and then I entered a hotel where I met the real monster. He simply put me in a hotel and left. I had my house, but I thought he was going to be with me to try to solve things. I don't know what happened, but I was vulnerable. I didn't even have my record. He paid the daily rate to the other hotel and I had to leave. I got in touch with him, but he didn't answer the cell phone or send a message. I answered and I went into despair because I abandoned all my familiar surroundings. I didn't have friends because he banned me from having friends. I couldn't have friends, so I didn't have friends. He stayed at the hotel for a while, paying the daily rate. Then I had to leave. I tried to contact him, but he didn't answer the phone or reply to my messages. I felt so alone and lost because I couldn't reach my usual support system. I couldn't have friends, so I reached out to some people, but I didn't get any response. It was all so confusing and overwhelming. The other day, I remember taking my things and my son and following a path back to my little house. I knew I wouldn't be able to live there anymore because I was working with him. My friends were worried sick, so I reached out to some folks, but I didn't hear back from anyone. It was all so confusing. The other day I grabbed my things, took my son and followed. I followed a path back to my little house, which I knew I wouldn't be able to live in anymore because I was working with him and he was doing things with him. I had money, but it just disappeared. I said, "Okay, I understand. Everything is happening so fast." I followed my life. I came back to my house and talked to the owner. I explained what was going on, and I locked myself and my son inside. We had some friends who traveled with us. He made the paramotor flight for this. He traveled a lot. I had money for this, but it just disappeared. I said I didn't want to contact him and I took the money. I said, "Okay, I understand. Everything was very fast, and I'll follow my life." I followed my life and I came back to my house. I talked to the owner of the house and explained what was happening. I locked myself and my son inside and we stayed there. We had some friends who traveled with us. He made the paramotor flight and he traveled a lot. There were a few couples and one day, a sister of one of our friends appeared. She started going places with us and we had never realized this situation. I found out that the sister of her friend lived in the house I lived in, and I realized that I had never had an intuition. I had never realized anything. You never saw anything, never showed anything. Suddenly, something inside you speaks, and you realize what's happening. I discovered there were a few couples that were just friends at first, and then one day one of these friends started going places with us. I had no idea about this sister of hers, and I just found out that I lived in the same house as her. I had no idea and I never realized anything. You never saw anything, but then something suddenly happened and you had this feeling. I realized that she was leaving with him, and they were having a relationship. She lived in the same house as her sister, and she started having a relationship with him. I never realized it that way, but I had this feeling. I asked him, as always, "We are crazy, right? We see situations where you don't have a creation. Situations where it doesn't exist in his head. That's it." I contacted him and I asked so. I had a hunch that she was leaving with him, and I was right. They were a couple, and she lived with her sister. She started dating him, but I never noticed. I had a feeling, so I asked him about it. He said he didn't have any plans, but I had no idea. I was totally lost. I couldn't pay the rent on my own, and I was working with him at the time. I had to talk to him about it. He helped me out financially for a while because I worked with him for almost 5 years. I was with him at the store for about 5 years, and I did my part, but he just said, "Not." I was totally lost. I couldn't keep up with the rent. I was working with him at the time and I had nowhere to stay. I had to take a look at my situation and ask for help. He had helped me financially for almost 5 years because I worked with him. I followed him in the store for almost 5 years. I did my part and he simply said that the problem was bigger than I realized. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I started organizing my things. I felt it was her, but I never had any proof. I was obliged to see her only like that. If you can understand me, it was me. I was already going through that process. I was very thin, very sad and depressed. I didn't know why. Life no longer made sense to me. It wasn't because I lost it. He knows why that I had already lost so many things to life, and it was taking so much from me. But it was mine. My son, 9 years old, showed me that mothers fight for their children. I fought for him. I don't go for him. He encouraged me, helped me, and was there for me all the time. I looked back and spoke to people asking how they could not care. He is me understood. Life felt so confusing and difficult at times. I had lost so much, and it felt like I was drowning in my debts. But my son, who was only 9 years old, showed me the strength to fight for myself. He encouraged me, helped me, and was always there for me. I couldn't believe how people treated this as if it was just another flu. But my cancer was so much more than that. It was a strong, powerful force in my life. I never let myself become a victim. I just wanted to find the woman who was truly Forte Med. Everything really came to an end when it did. It was so hard to let go. I remember getting all my furniture delivered to PR, and I gave some of it to Donna. I also got some bags and we shared our things. I had to deal with it as if it were the flu, but it was so much more than that. It was a very strong experience for me. I never made myself a victim to anyone. I just went to discover the woman who was Forte Med. Really everything was important to me. It's over now. When it's all over, I'll speak. Arriving was difficult. It was very difficult. I remember getting all my furniture delivered to PR. I got some bags, some of our things, and we followed in the world. Because I had nothing to do, I ordered 1,000 apologies to my son. I asked for forgiveness for putting him in that situation. I felt guilty of ISO because I put him in that situation believing it was the right thing to do. But it consumed me every day. I remember that we went to a nearby avenue where we were going to get the buses. It was those city buses and there was no money. What I paid was not left. Neither was there any bus. I was just trying to make it to the Pineros, and I got a ride with a kind stranger. I asked the driver if he could give me a ride, and I explained the situation to him. I showed him my surgery, and I said I had nowhere to go. I didn't have a place to stay, and I had to talk to someone. I remember that I was my son, and I was sitting on a corner at the bus stop waiting when I saw his car passing by with her. She laughed at the situation, knowing she had laughed at the same thing happening. I followed, and I remember asking the driver for a ride. I explained the situation to him, showing him my surgery. I said I had nowhere to go, and I didn't have a place to stay. I had to talk to someone. He gave me a ride to the Pineros where I took a train. I had to make that situation again so that someone would give me a ride to my son's metro station. I remember landing at Ipiranga again, only believing that I was going to have a support network there from friends. People came to frustration. I remember entering and going to the house of a friend of years. When I speak, years was my whole life. He was kind enough to give me a ride to the Pineros, which I really appreciated. I had to make sure that I could get to my son at the metro, and I remember feeling grateful that I had a support network there. But then I encountered some frustration. I remember entering the house of a friend who had been a constant in my life for years. She was my neighbor, my friend, my companion, always there for me, especially during her children's birth and when she was operating. I had always been there for her, and I was ready to give up everything for her. I always did it. I remember arriving with my son at around 8:30 on a Sunday. I asked if she could welcome me for the night, and I'm grateful that she did. She was my neighbor, my friend, and my partner. She was always there for me, and I always had a lot of things to do. I was always there when she had her children, when she was in surgery, and I abandoned everything for her. I did it all for her, and I always did it. I remember that I arrived with my son. It was about 8:30 on a Sunday. I asked if she could welcome me for the night. She pulled the carpet from under my feet. I believe that it was said, "No, you don't have to. I don't have to go anywhere." How many times did I leave to do things for my mother, even for my eldest son, so that she could be there? She was always there for me. She was a true friend. She said, "No, I feel so much, but no, you can't even sleep there." I could say, "Man will be." I came and I pulled the life carpet off. I believe that no matter what I could say, "Okay, but I don't have to." I left so many times to do things for myself, for my mother, and for my eldest son so that he could be there with her. She was my final friend. She said, "No, I feel so much, but no, you can't even sleep there." I could say, "Man, you can't even sleep there." I took a deep breath. I said, "Not everything is okay. Okay. I will not be calm." "No, you won't be upset." I said, No, I don't remember that. I was stunned. I got my son and sat on a well-known bench in Ipiranga. I took a deep breath and once again delivered my life into the hands of God because I didn't have what I needed. I took a deep breath and said, I don't know. I can't afford to host here. I said, okay. I will not be calm. No, you won't be upset. I said, no. I don't remember that. I was so stunned. I was stunned. I got my son and sat on a well-known bench in Ipiranga. I took a deep breath and once again placed my life in the hands of God, because I didn't have what I needed to ask for help. Few by degrees, I ended up sleeping on the road that night. Tomorrow I had there. I resolved and had an idea of looking for a friend. Here was one, not looking for another friend. Here was no one. I looked for my family but no one was there. I placed my hand in the hand of God. I said, God, I no longer have what I need to ask for help because I stayed in this situation for months when you came to the street with my son, who had cancer. I didn't have to ask for help very often. I spent a night on the road and the next day I had nowhere to stay. Tomorrow I'll try to find a friend. I looked for my family but I couldn't find them. I looked for my family but I couldn't find them. I prayed to God and I said, God, I don't know what to do because I've been in this situation for months. And it's been really hard. I was devastated because I didn't have the courage to talk to people. I went through the life of a homeless person, and I felt like I didn't fit in. I felt like no one existed. It was too much. I remember that on the first night I was in a really tough spot in my life and I had no one to turn to. I had this really nice guy who came by with a cart to collect my recyclables during the day. He asked if I could stay in the same place as my son, who was really scared of being taken advantage of or hurt, either by me or by someone else. I was so scared that this would happen to me or my son that I decided to stay. I spent the day resting in a little corner. He was a kind, humble man who lived in a one-cart vehicle. He would collect the recyclables during the day and offer to take them to the local recycling center. He asked me to stay with my son, who was worried about being taken advantage of. He was so kind and thoughtful that I decided to stay. He would sleep in the same small space as my son and me. Every night, he would return to sleep in the same place. One day he asked me, why is this beautiful girl living on the street? He talked a lot, but he also worked during the day collecting and delivering recyclables. He came back with bread and milk for my son. He helped me clean the place. He bathed my son and brought medicine to me. He treated me like a daughter, always being very kind and thoughtful. He stayed with me every night and I was so grateful. I remember asking him, wow, a girl so beautiful. You have no face that is a resident of the street. What is happening there? He talks so much, but he went to work to take his recyclables during the day. He came back with bread and milk for my son. He took me to the bathroom, arranged the place for me, and brought medicine to me. He cared for me as a daughter, treating me very well. I never found this kind man again, but he did. He did in my life, at least in this part of it that I lived in. I felt loved, you know why. So he never saw me as a little guy, but he gave all the care that I needed at that time to have someone there. Then I think a strange person that I never saw in such a situation, vulnerable as I did, that for me he was there. He welcomed me. He helped me. I never found that same kind of love again, but he showed me a different kind of love. He showed me love in the most beautiful way. He showed me love in the most difficult times of my life. He showed me love when I was on the street. He showed me love when I was in a situation I never thought I would be in. He showed me love when I was vulnerable. He was there for me. He helped me. He was an amazing person. I remember one day I was walking with my son. I was carrying a heavy bag. I remember suddenly stopping. I looked up and there was a childhood friend of mine who had studied with me in the first series. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk to me, not her son. She came to talk. I remember one day I was out for a stroll with my son, carrying a heavy bag. Suddenly I stopped and looked up. There was a childhood friend of mine who used to study with me in the first series. She recognized me and came to talk. I told her I didn't need her son to come with us. He suddenly returned, and she explained that he was worried about me. She came to me and asked what was wrong. I told her I was waiting for a friend, but I looked dirty. She asked what was wrong, but I didn't answer. I said, "I'm waiting for a friend who will come and get me." She didn't understand. She took me home and said, "Let's go to." I was talking to a friend when she asked me what was going on. I told her that I wasn't waiting for a friend, but it was clear that something was up. She came over and asked me what was wrong, but I tried to avoid answering. I told her that I was waiting for a friend, but she insisted on taking me home with her. She said, "Let's go to my house. We can talk there." I tried to get out of it, but she insisted. In the end, she took me to her house with her son, and she welcomed me in. She said she just needed a moment. I remember that she lived in a house with 4 children. The oldest one was already married, and she had 3 daughters. She lived in a room that also served as a kitchen. The people there were very friendly. I tried to find an excuse to leave, but he insisted on taking me to his home. He said, "Let's go with me home. We can talk there." I knew he was taking me to his house with my son. He welcomed me in. I just needed a little time. He lived in a small home. I remember that he lived with his 4 children. One of his daughters was already married, and the other 3 daughters lived with him. He had 2 more people living in the house. At first I was a bit embarrassed because the house was small. I didn't want to get in the way, but he said, "It fits 4, 5 or 10. You can stay here. I'll help you." He helped me so much. I spent a month there. Even with this whole situation, I looked for work. I worked as a nail technician in the morning and in the afternoon. I was really worried about the 2 people who came inside the house. At first, I was really embarrassed because the house was small. I didn't want to get in the way, but she said, "It fits 4, fits 5, fits 10. You will stay here. I will help you." She helped me so much. I spent a month at home, even though I was dealing with this whole situation. I looked for work during the morning and afternoon. I worked in a bakery. I explained my situation to the owner. I told him what was happening and he hired me. Even though I was dealing with cancer, he didn't think of it as a problem. He didn't think of me as sick. He said, "You start tomorrow." I remember that morning I made nails because I was in the process. I went to the process. I made a nail here, another there. There was a blin. I explained my situation to the owner of the bakery. I told him what was happening, and he let me stay in his bakery. Even though he knew I was dealing with cancer, he didn't think of me as sick. He didn't think about anything else. He said, "You start tomorrow." I remember that morning I made some nails because I was going through a process. I went to the process and I made a nail here and there. Then Blin entered and I worked in the afternoon. I went to a house. Then I remember that I gathered the things I was going to take to the house. I gave the deposit and I came in. My brother came to me saying, "It is in this phase of people who are wanting someone to divide the rent if I could divide it with him." My brother, who turned his back on me and mistreated me, was the one who did badly, but it was my brother. I entered a house in the afternoon and I worked there. I remember going to a house, but then I realized that I was supposed to be working. I gave the deposit and my brother came to me. He was in this phase where he wanted someone to split the rent with him. I felt like I was different from him, but I didn't feel like I was better or worse. Then I said, I'm not like them. I have no anger or hate. I want to get closer to myself. I did everything I could to bring my family together. I fought a lot so that my family was united. I went there so that he could get the house. I remember it was a house at the bottom of another house. I didn't have a sink and I didn't have a shower. I didn't feel like I was any different from them, but I said, I'm not like them and I'm okay with that. I'm not angry or hateful. I just want to get closer to myself. I did everything I could to bring my family together. I fought so hard to make it happen. I went to the only place I knew, and there was a house at the bottom of another house. I had no sink, no shower, and no pipe. I remember there was nothing but people on the street. I went through the process of living on the street, and it was a paradise. I faced it and said, let's go. When I entered the house, I didn't see a sink, but I followed because I had no other choice. I could either speak or go back to living on the street. I won't be able to live at her house, but I can work there. I remember that I worked in this. I remember there was nothing but a pipe that had to have a shower. I faced the process of living on the street, which was a paradise. I went to the house and I didn't see a sink, but I followed because I thought, it's here or it's on the street again. I couldn't live at her house, but I could work there. I remember that I worked in a bakery and was saving money to put in a sink. My brother had one, and he passed away. He was on catnip too. I remember one day he arrived home upset, and he didn't come to really arrive. It was God who took that situation and made it better. I said, more good things will happen in my life, because my brother. I remember spending that clear night the other day. I was collecting money to purchase a sink, and my brother passed away. He was also a cat. One day he arrived home upset. He didn't come to visit. He came because God is amazing. God took that situation and made it better. I said, more miracles should happen in my life. I remember spending a clear night the other day with my son. I said, let's go for a walk. I remember going to CRAS near home. It wasn't too far away. I walked with my son under the sun, which was very hot. I went to ask for help in a way that I wouldn't go back to the street. I didn't want to go back to the street, but I couldn't live with him in that house. After all this, I said, give me a hand. I remember. I went for a walk and I ended up at CRAS. I spoke to God. I talk a lot, you know. I believe God is in everything, and I said there was nothing else to do. I remember passing a house with Spiritist Center Card Assist written on it. I said, here I will try because I didn't have what I had no more to resort to. There was more and I entered. I remember that I went for a walk and I got a negative from CRAS. I spoke to God a lot. I believe God is in everything. I said, there is nothing else to do. I'm coming home. I remember passing a house with Spiritist Center Card Assist written on it. I said, here I will try because I didn't have what to do. I had no more to resort to. I entered and I remember saying, it when we arrive. You have to make a registration, and I made this registration desperate even. I was motivated by calm because I couldn't arrive there shouting or crying, begging. I didn't know what to do. I sat down and needed to take a pass to see if I needed anything because I am Sekfiko, I am Kadika. So I believe in what I remember. They helped me at a level that I did it with them. I took the pass they referred me to. When we arrived, I had to register and I was really nervous. I didn't want to arrive shouting or crying, so I took a moment to sit down and collect myself. I'm a Sekfiko, a Kadika, so I had some trust in the process. I took the pass they gave me and went to see someone. I didn't have to say much. I just listened. She said, you don't go today. You go for your house. I trusted God and I remember thinking, man can't be real. I had lost trust in people. I had a consultation with the person I had been talking to, and I didn't have to say a word. I was able to speak freely about anything that was happening to me. He said, you don't go today. You go for your house. I trusted God. I remember saying, man, can't you be real? To what extent will it help me? I no longer trusted people or believed in anything. For me, it was supernatural. All I remember is that it was a day and a little in the afternoon. I only know that it was over when it was 7 o'clock at night. I was inside my house with a stove, refrigerator, and everything a house needs, so it wasn't luxurious, but it had everything that had been donated. I know they made a movement, rented a house, and put everything I needed inside that house. Then I had security speak to me today. I'm going to sleep quietly, and I'm sure no harm will come to me. I'm not an expert, but I do know that the supernatural can be a bit confusing for some people. I had a very unusual experience once when I was living in São Lourenço. It was a little after 7 in the evening, and I was at home with my stove, refrigerator, and all the other essentials. It wasn't a luxurious lifestyle, but it was comfortable. I remember a group that came and set up a house for us. They made sure I had everything I needed, and I'm grateful for that. Recently, I had a conversation with Luim, and it made me realize that God's supernatural actions in my life have been incredible. I'm truly thankful. I also have a wonderful job working for a wonderful family. I'm a caregiver for elderly people, and they've welcomed me and my son like we were their own family. I'll always remember her, but her daughters are also my friends. I'm so grateful for the supernatural experiences I've had in my life. I'm thankful for the good things that have happened to me. I'm a caregiver for elderly people, and I worked for a wonderful family. They welcomed me and my son with open arms. They treated me like a daughter, and I'll always remember how they took care of me. Music. During this time I felt a bit lost. I remember when she passed away. I thought, what am I going to do now? I spent a year and a little bit more at the house where I lived. I couldn't pay the bills, so I was living in São Lourenço, a neighboring city. I was so immersed in music that I sometimes lost sight of myself. I remember passing away and my sister passing away. I said, what am I going to do with my life? As soon as I finished delivering the house where I lived, I couldn't pay the mortgage, so I moved to São Lourenço, a city next to where I lived. My brother, my mother, and my father passed away. I ended up going back to São Lourenço, and I dreamed of a pie. I dreamed with a pie and I said, I will invest in this. I really like to cook. I ended up taking that pie and selling it. I knew the power of God once again in my life because I sold to my brother was there for me when my parents passed away. I went back to São Lourenço de Serra and had a dream about a pie. I decided to invest in that dream because I really like to cook. I ended up selling a lot and I got clients. I'm doing it for myself now. I'm living in the house I remember from when I was a kid. It was a small village with families only. I was the only outsider, but they treated me like family. I sold a lot and I was able to attract a clientele. I've got a little more to speak about now. I'm breathing again and I'm working for myself. I'm doing it for me and me. I managed to get back on my feet and lived in the house I remember. It was a village of families and they were all related. I was the only outsider there, but I did very well. They treated me like family. You know, I was part of the family. Everyone treated me well. I remember that I could grow up. I was able to pay my rent and my bills. I was able to provide a better life for my son through my own efforts. I sold on the street, walking and selling over the internet, but I was able to make my part sold and came out well. People really looked for me. I remember my brother, who lived in São Lourenço de Serra, contacted me and said, the house there from the... I had a really nice time with the family. I was able to grow up and pay my rent and bills, which was a huge relief. I was able to support my son and give him a better life. I sold things on the street and online, but I was able to sell my stuff and make a good living. I really looked for work. I remember my brother, who lived in São Lourenço de Serra, contacted me and said, my mom and dad passed away. They left a house on the beach, but it's empty now. You don't want to go there, but at least you don't have to pay rent. I was a little hesitant, but I said, no, I'm not well. I want to stay here. Then I thought, I can do what I'm doing here. I said, I will try. I remember I tried. I went to live on the beach. I left this house and delivered the house. My parents passed away, leaving behind a house on the beach that has been sitting empty ever since. You're not keen on visiting, and I totally understand. I'm not feeling well and I'm staying here. But then I thought, hey, I can do this. So I tried. I moved to the beach, left my old place and started selling pies and other stuff on the beach. Luckily, I didn't have to pay rent when I first arrived. I'm grateful I didn't have to worry about that. I decided to move to the beach to escape the rent, and I'm so glad I did. I started selling my pies and other things on the beach. But as soon as I arrived, the pandemic hit, and I was lucky enough to not have to pay rent. I'm grateful that I followed my heart and chose to stay there. It was a challenging time, and I'm still dealing with cancer. He's still part of my life, and I'm grateful for that. I'm fighting for my accompaniment in this process. It's a journey of change, and I'm here to support you. I lost my accompaniment at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was tough. I'm happy to say that I've been with my partner for 3 years now. It hasn't been easy though. I've had cancer and he's still in my life. Why do I say that? Because I like this. I fought for a while to get my support system. This process has changed everything. I disrupted a structure, a fixed address. I remember losing my support system at the beginning of the pandemic and then again at the end. But I'm fighting to this day. I believe that if I solve this, I'll get someone to help me through it because I need this support system. Things were improving again. I believe I was already stable. I downloaded the app from the Tiger and met my current husband, Marcos. It was a blessing in my life. He and his family welcomed me very kindly. I'm so grateful for my journey to this point. I'm still fighting and I'm so thankful for that. I'm starting my life anew. And I'm so excited to see what the future holds. I'm working on a snack board and it's been growing. I'm working with the Secretary of the City of Tourism, and it's been great. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to do what I love. I'm so thankful for my family, my kittens, and my dog. They've been there for me through thick and thin. And I'm so grateful for their unconditional love. My husband, Marcos, has been a blessing in my life. If I were family today, I'd tell you that I have a family today. I have lunches, birthdays, and I'm welcoming my children. I live with him and I have my kittens and my dog. I have everything that I had and lost. It's been 3 years since I'm with him. He's an amazing person who understands my trauma and my journey. It's sometimes difficult for him and I understand that, but God has put a person in my life who, if I were family today, I'd tell you that I have a family today. I have lunches, birthdays, and I welcome my children. I live with him. I have my kittens. I have my dog. I have everything that I had and lost. It's been 3 years since I'm with him. He's an amazing person who understands my trauma and my way of dealing with it. It's sometimes difficult for him, as I understand, but God has put a person in my life who cannot be explained. He is the one who fights together. He hugs my dreams. I started working in sales with Pastel de Leche. We set up a breakfast stand at the fair. I had the idea to sell breakfast to the fans, including a dumpling, and that grew into a snack board. I am once again in a situation where God has played a role. I was invited by the Secretary of the City of Tourism to work there. I am starting my life anew. I'm so grateful for the journey that has led me to this point. I've learned so much from the simple things in life, and I'm thankful for the growth I've experienced. I'm excited to continue making memories with my loved ones and share my story with you. I'm going to tell you again, my dear, because I'll never get tired of doing so. Today my life has meaning, and I believe it was worth the journey because I learned the value of true small things. The journey is always changing, and nobody can make me feel that way. I miss my mother, my father, and my family, but I just had to let them go. My father had his own journey, but I can still say that I love my brothers as much as they don't believe me. Today I prefer to live in peace. I prefer to live far from all of them, but I still do what I can to pray for them and ask God to watch over them wherever they are. I've learned that my peace is not worth giving up myself. My father had his own journey, and I love my brothers dearly. I'm at peace with them, even though they might not believe me. I've chosen to focus on my own peace and well-being. I'm here, far from everything, and I'm doing my best to pray and ask God to watch over them. I've learned that asking for love, attention, and affection from others isn't as valuable as it seems. I've also learned that if someone doesn't give their heart, their actions aren't genuine. I think today everything he did was to learn and grow. God will show him the right path. I don't want to cause her any pain. It's been around 7 months since she contacted me, asking for forgiveness for what she did. She did the same thing with her. I've learned to be more open with my feelings, and I'm grateful for that. I've also learned to say no more, which I'm happy about. I'm learning to value myself more, and to trust that I deserve the best. I've also learned from my neighbor who stayed with him, and she asked me for forgiveness. She told me that she understands why it happened, but I believe it is God. I believe that the law of return exists. If you do good, good things come back to you, but if you do evil, evil things come back to you. I believe that this whole scenario of these people who went through my life was a learning experience. Some went to learn to love others and to learn how to love and not act in a way that is not me. I believe that today I can talk for you. I'm at peace with myself. My neighbor who stayed with him asked me for forgiveness. She told me that she understands why it happened, but she believes that the law of return exists. If you do good, God returns the favor. If you do evil, God returns the favor. I believe that this whole scenario of people who went through my life is a test. Some went to learn to love others, to learn how to love and not act in ways that are not loving. Today I can talk for you. I'm at peace with myself today. I'm happy with myself today. I know myself much better today. I don't accept a non-life as just a no. Today I know why I don't arrive. I learned to say no because I couldn't say no. I was always ready for everyone at all times, and I didn't look at myself. Today I can talk for you. I don't accept little for my life because I don't deserve little. I'm so grateful for who I am today. I've learned so much about myself, and I'm loving every minute of it. I've learned to say no when I need to, because I deserve so much more than what I've had in the past. If you want me in your life, I'll be there. But if you don't, I'll respect that. I'm living my life to the fullest right now. I live in Sao Paulo and I'm enjoying my independence. I don't have much contact with my family, but I do have a sister, and we talk on WhatsApp from time to time. I'm so grateful for the time we had together, and I'll always cherish the memories we made. I'm doing my best to move on with my life. I'm living in Sao Paulo, and I'm trying to focus on myself. I'm not in touch with my family or any friends, except for a sister I talk to on WhatsApp. I'm trying to be strong and move forward, even though it's been tough. I know that people will need me, and as I go through these changes, I'm doing my best to keep going. There's a 17-year-old boy who's been a good friend and has stuck by me through thick and thin. I'm reaching out to my friends because I'm struggling with some personal stuff. I've been talking to a psychologist, and he's helping me deal with some past traumas. I'm trying to move forward, but it's been tough. I've been thinking a lot about my childhood friend, who's been there for me since we were kids. He's a 17-year-old boy, and he's been a rock for me. I know it might sound a bit strange, but he's a son. He's an amazing kid, and he's been there for me through thick and thin. Despite everything we've been through, he's always been there for me. He's kind, he's not a person who's been hurt and is returning, and he's always full of love. Mom, I love you. A kiss. There's some trauma in it too, but I'm trying to move forward. I know it's a bit strange, but he's a son. He's amazing, and he's been so supportive throughout this process. He's kind, and he's not someone who was hurt and returns. He's always loving every time, every moment. I love you, Mom. I'm not going to talk about how he will go through this, but I believe he's well evolved in this regard. I know it's a bit lazy, but I believe it's part of his age. He's realizing that he strives to please me. He's very supportive. I believe we're going to a psychologist to see why this is a mark of trauma. I believe I need to get out. He's going through a tough time, but he's doing well. I think he's just going through a phase, but he's really struggling to please me. We've been talking to a psychologist, and he's helping me understand why I'm so sensitive to this. I think I need to get out of this situation. Recording this is helping me a lot. I finally had the courage to say what I needed to say. I needed to put an end to this story because it's still a part of my life, and it's not a good part. I think he's in the same boat. He doesn't like to talk about it, and when he does, it's fast, but he doesn't like it. I'm so grateful that I can share my story here. It's been such a journey, and it's still so important to me. I never had the courage to share my story, but I needed to know myself. I needed to say goodbye to that story because she still affects my life. I believe he feels the same way. He doesn't like to talk about it, but he doesn't like it either. He doesn't like to dwell on the past. I don't either. I still feel the pain and I still feel the hurt. I can still come back there and it still hurts. I don't feel welcomed or understood. He is my support. Marcos and I are the two figures who will have to endure me. They will have to hold on to their lives. You like this story? Who makes this channel? They're real. I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you'll stick around. I'm here to support you and I'm here for you. I'm here for all women who are going through a tough time in their relationships. I want to show you that you can turn things around and build a new history. If you're going through a divorce and want to share your story, please fill out the recording schedule form in the description of this video. Together we are stronger, and our next video is the story of Karine, a woman who lost everything in divorce and had to become a call girl. Don't lose hope because you never know what might happen. Women, you're so unique to us in this mission to strengthen women who are suffering in their relationships and show that they can also turn things around. We want to tell your story of divorce on our channel. Just fill in the recording schedule form that is here in the description of this video. Together we are stronger, and our next video is the story of Karine, a woman who lost everything in divorce and had to become a call girl. Don't lose hope because you know how it is. I don't know if you have children, but the first year of a child is very intense. You don't sleep well and our quarrels intensified. My ex-husband was a manipulator. He manipulated many situations, and I was sick when I met him because I had experienced so much violence. I totally get it. I don't know if you have kids, but the first year is super intense. You don't sleep well, and your relationship gets more and more intense. My ex was a manipulator. He tricked me in so many ways. I was sick when I met him and he was violent. He could have done way worse to me. I remember when he tried to have sex with me, and he added my friend to Facebook. He was angry about everything that had happened to me. You know why? I really know. We got so angry, and then a moment came when I took messages later. I had a really tough time with this fight I had with him. I felt so angry, and I thought he was having an affair with another woman. I couldn't understand why he was still in contact with other women. I thought, what is going on with me? Am I crazy? Because he's always been like this. You have a problem, Yulua. You've always been like this. So I'm not crazy. You're crazy, so I'm the one who's crazy. I'm the problem.